Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter Kyle Mullins. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany.
It has been a conversation we have now been having for weeks. You and I have discussed before that former President Donald Trump owes over $500 million in legal penalties. Before we dive into the conversation here, can you walk us through how the former president got here?
Absolutely. So as we've discussed before, this is really the story of two different legal cases. The first legal case is one brought by E. Jean Carroll. She's a writer. She sued Trump for sexual abuse and defamation and won two verdicts against him in the state of New York. And those verdicts totaled over $88 million in damages to him in those cases. He was able to post a $91 million bond in that case. So while he is appealing those verdicts, and we will see where that goes. The second one is the much bigger one. That's the New York Attorney General's case that was brought against him for him and his companies and some of his family members for allegedly repeatedly lying about his assets and generally puffing up his business expertise and his own net worth in order to obtain better terms on loans, for example. And that in that case, the judge handed down a judgment earlier this year that said that he owed about over $350 million in damages plus $100 million in interest. That number is going up every single day until he pays. And he needs to post a bond in that case or pay up. He hasn't yet. His lawyers say that he doesn't have the cash in court. He claims that he might. We'll see what happens on that case as well. But he needs to do so before he ends up appealing the case.
New York Attorney General Letitia James said she was prepared to seize some of his assets if he couldn't come up with the cash. Has she made good on her word yet?
So she hasn't made good on her word yet. They seem to be respecting a sort of 30-day deadline, giving him that amount of time to come up with the cash he needs in that case. That 30-day deadline is this upcoming Monday, March 25th, pretty soon. So because of that, she has actually started taking some preliminary steps that would be necessary in the event that she did choose to seize some assets. We do think that it would be easier for her to seize assets in the state of New York because that's where she has jurisdiction. She could theoretically seize assets elsewhere, but it would, again, just be easier in the state of New York. She filed the judgment with the county clerk in Westchester County, New York, which is just north of New York City. Trump has two properties in that county, and so filing the judgment there is the first step that could potentially be taken toward eventually, potentially seizing either his golf course there or his Seven Springs estate.
If you live in New York, you know that Trump has quite a few properties here, but can you bring us up to speed here? Give us a general overview of his real estate portfolio.
Sure. Out of his roughly $2.6 billion fortune, real estate makes up just under $2 billion of that, about $1.9 billion. Most of it is concentrated, or a large chunk of it is concentrated in New York, but there's really three categories that we're talking about here. So the first is commercial properties. That includes office, retail, hotels, all that kind of stuff. And that spans, he has properties in New York, properties in San Francisco, properties in Chicago, properties in Las Vegas. The second category is residential real estate. He's got homes in Florida, again, homes in Las Vegas. He's got homes in California, homes in New York, of course, including his penthouse in Trump Tower. And then the third one is sort of resort and real estate, resort and golf properties. He's got 10 golf courses across the United States. He's got 3 more in Scotland and Ireland. And then he's got resorts like Mar-a-Lago, resorts like Doral in Miami. So all of these, he has this wide range of different types of properties in this about $2.2 billion real estate portfolio.
Letitia James, New York's AG, did say that she was, like I said, prepared to seize his assets, even said something to the effect of, I look at 40 Wall Street each day. What do you think he could do to ensure that his assets aren't seized?
So he's really coming down to the wire here, and it's hard to say what he's going to be able to do to ensure that his assets aren't seized. I will note on the 40 Wall Street thing that my colleague Zach Everson had some reporting out just earlier this week, noting that 40 Wall Street is actually probably financially his weakest property. He might actually be somewhat happy to get rid of it, or at least declare bankruptcy on it. Regardless, what could he do to ensure that his properties are not seized? Potentially, he could try to sell them himself. And that was what my coverage focused on this week, was what would a fire sale of Trump's properties actually look like?
Let's talk about that because his attorney said that a fire sale of assets you're reporting would result in, quote, massive irrecoverable losses. What would a fire sale look like and what is that?
Yeah, so I mean, the basic idea behind a fire sale is you're trying to get rid of things as quickly as possible, to get cash as quickly as possible, and his attorneys refer to this as irrecoverable losses because if he were to sell something at a fire sale rate, typically what you're doing is you're trading speed for money. So you're getting speed in terms of selling the property very quickly, but you might be losing. You might not be able to sell it for as much as you want to be able to otherwise. And what the argument that they're making in those legal documents is essentially that if he's forced to sell his properties extremely quickly in order to meet this appellate deadline, say he sells a $50 million property for $30 million, he uses the $30 million cash, uses that to meet his necessary legal deadlines, and then he later wins on appeal. There's no way he can get his property back because he had to sell it in order to meet that deadline. So that's the basic argument that they're making in those court documents.
And you found for Forbes that his best assets to offload would either be his golf resorts or his homes not in New York. Talk about why.
Yeah, so I talked about these categories of different types of assets that he has earlier. Golf courses have a couple of different benefits. The first thing is that they're not usually. Well, first of all, none of his U.S. golf courses have any mortgages on them, and mortgages could potentially slow down any a sale. The second thing is that these types of purchases are not usually heavily leveraged. So theoretically, so people who buy golf courses are used to doing so basically with cash. Or mostly with cash, and if they have to go find a loan for it, that could also slow down the transaction. And remember, what matters right now is speed. The third thing is that another thing that could potentially slow down these transactions is people when they buy an asset. Typically, they want to do due diligence on it. If you're buying a home, you're going to want to have it inspected to make sure there's no mold in the walls. If you're buying a business, you're going to want to see all the numbers, and you're going to want to make sure that the golf course is, for example, well maintained and the carts all work and that kind of thing. So in that situation, that's another thing that can slow down these purchases. But if golf courses are sometimes bought by their members, golf clubs are often sometimes bought by their members, and so members know the property well. They might be willing to forego some of that paperwork that an outside buyer might be willing to go for. With all of that said, I talked to one expert in golf courses who told me that sort of the minimum for a golf course purchase is still something like 30 days, which is just not enough time. He would really have to speed up that timeline in order to dump something before.
You said that his homes not in New York would be the best to dump. Why not his home in the Empire State then?
So New York just has a little bit more of we'll say a lengthy legal process when it comes to selling properties. You could still turn around a sale in New York, but it's likely going to take, even a super fast sale is probably going to take weeks instead of days. There are more legal barriers involved. There's also not a standard contract that is used in New York for property sales. Each one has to be drawn up individually, whereas in a lot of other states you have sort of standard sale contracts that are able to quickly be reproduced and replicated. So that is something that would take more time in the state of New York.
He also has some commercial properties, including office spaces. Can you talk to us a little bit about the difficulties he would have selling those?
Absolutely. The commercial properties are really, really difficult for him to unload, especially those office properties. The office market is just horrendous right now. I had one source tell me that lenders are running for the hills when it comes to office properties. They just do not want to touch these. Already we're looking at things that maybe had he sold them 10 years ago would be worth X amount, and they're worth 30 or 40% below that. And that's at a fair market rate. That's not even counting the fire sale rate, right? Because we're going to be talking about discounting things in order to exchange that for speed. And then the other issue with office spaces is that they are much more complex properties. I mentioned that people want to see the paperwork. These types of transactions, especially in kind of complex ones, tend to take months, if not years. You're going to want people to be able to come into the office space, see it, understand what they're buying, get comfortable with it, build a relationship with them. That's how you sell an office space for a good price. Trump doesn't have time to do any of that. So selling off some of his office assets in New York just does not seem like a very good idea, unless, again, we're talking about somebody who knows the property really well and will be willing to bail him out, which is just highly, highly unlikely in the event of office space.
When you think about Donald Trump as a person, most Americans have very strong feelings towards him either way. He is a very polarizing figure. Do politics come into play here?
Politics do come into play a little bit. I talked to one real estate broker in New York who told me that he pointed to a recent article in the New York Times that showed that condo prices in New York, in buildings with the Trump name on them, they're selling for a discount compared to buildings without the Trump name on them. And that didn't used to be true. Before he was president, condos in Trump branded buildings actually sold for more than the average condo in New York City. So, New York City is a deep blue city. It's full of people who, did not vote for Donald Trump in the last election, in the vast majority of them. And so, there's some speculation that, if you're seen as the person who's bailing out Donald Trump, that could be socially disadvantageous for you. On the other hand, I talked to some folks in Florida who told me that would not be an issue there. Florida is it's a former swing state, now trending red. He won it by 3 points in 2020, which in Florida, I speaking as a native Floridian, that's a veritable landslide in the state of Florida. He would have less problems probably finding politically friendly folks to potentially look at his properties, especially because what he's selling there is residences, and so there might be a little bit less politics tied up in that.
I want to read a sentence from your Forbes piece and then get you to elaborate on it. You wrote this, quote, "Ultimately, conversation after conversation returns back to the strangeness of the whole situation." Why is that?
Yeah, I talked to half a dozen real estate experts about, in reporting out this piece in various different types of real estate. And every single one of my conversations just kept coming back to the fact that this is a super weird hypothetical situation. They have no idea how Donald Trump is going to figure out a financial way out of this. Turning around a fire sale on even a home in mere days is something that is really, really difficult to do, let alone a golf course, let alone an office building. These are very, very difficult assets to try to turn around in days. It's difficult to sell anything in days. You can't sell a car in days. So they just kept coming back to this over and over, saying, like, look, we're trying to give you the best advice we can based on our expertise in these sectors. But this is a really weird situation. And on top of everything else, we're talking about a former president currently running for president. That just adds a whole other layer of complications on top of everything else. The word is overused, but this is an unprecedented situation.
It's an unprecedented situation. The experts say they don't know how Donald Trump is going to do it, but he has to do it, which brings me to my final question. What is the next deadline? When does he need to have this cash?
Donald Trump needs the money by Monday, March 25th. That's this upcoming Monday. We don't know what he's going to be able to do to turn these kinds of things around. His lawyers, again, have said in legal filings that they have not been able to find insurance companies willing to work with him to post bond, either partial or full bonds, because they're skeptical of his real estate assets as collateral for those bonds. And he can't put up the cash. As far as we can tell, he doesn't have the cash. He claimed on Truth Social the other day that he does have the cash. That seems unlikely, but theoretically, he could have come across something somewhere at some point. We're not sure where this is going to go next. The only way to find out is to wait and watch, or he could be granted relief by the appellate court. I think that might be the most likely way he gets out of this at this point.
Kyle, a lot remains to be seen, but I know one thing's for certain. As the situation develops, you will come back on, hopefully, and break it down with me. Kyle Mullins, thank you so much for joining me.
Always happy to be here, Brittany.